Hello everyone, I'm Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion around war. I have no idea what I'll be saying. I'm just going to allow my own sort of feeling to surface. But before I start this discussion, it's very important to get centered, take a few deep breaths, because this is really a reflection. So I'll close my eyes. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. The first thing to say about war is that it's in all of us. It comes as the sensation to defend ourselves against something, or it might arise through the desire to attack something that we feel is threatening in some way. We all do it when we argue, when we hate someone, when we hold a resentment. All war starts within each individual human being. All defense is the beginning of war. So starting from that philosophical position, we are seeing in the world today, there's been, 80 million in the Second World War killed. What was it, 20 million in the First World War? I'm not sure of the stats there. There's been millions and millions and millions of individual people who have had their lives taken through murder in the name of some higher purpose, whether it be for democracy, whether it be to protect one's own country, whether it is about the spoils of war. A conquest has happened in order to take from others some riches. Certainly that has been a very strong reason for war. Maybe it's to protect business interests. Maybe it's for a higher God. That's been, the call for war for centuries and centuries. We think we can kill the other in order to stop an idea from happening. We use the threat of killing someone or the actual act of it as a deterrent, as a message to others to do not follow that line, or to not join that group, or to adhere to what is believed as the right way or the only way, on the side of freedom, on the side of whatever. But when you actually look at killing and death, it's really hard for me, I have to say, as a female. Because females are socialised differently to males. We're not identifying with the heroism of war. Although, women will have husbands and sons going there and they'll want them safe. But ultimately, as a female, I'm not raised with that consciousness at all. Not even with other females. Maybe younger women these days are hitting other women, I don't know. And certainly I've seen girls have fights. But typically we don't think like that. It's more, you either talk it out with the other person who you're having a conflict with, or you ignore them. Women can be good at that, psychological games. But it's almost unfathomable to me personally. I've always had difficulty connecting to it. Although I've seen conflict in my own home many times, and it's been pretty full on. And yes, at times violent, verbally and physically. But I still have trouble with it. Like, where I struggle with it is I myself I don't feel any desire to hurt anyone, even to the point of if I'm walking along the footpath, I don't even want to step on an ant. I have this inner feeling for the honouring of all life. And I mean, I've sat and watched, ants in their little groups and the intelligence of how they've moved along the footpath, and they communicate with each other as they go. So for me, life has been this passing parade. I've been very interested, and that doesn't mean that I haven't been angry and I haven't wanted to hit out. I have. And I suppose I can identify with an impulsive act of violence where someone has lost control. They've got very passionate. But an organised violence, for me, has been a difficult one. You'd have to have very good marketing to convince people that it's in their interest to kill other people who they don't know, because it's not even personal, and that it's for the higher good in some way, which has often been the marketing behind any sort of organised conflict, whether it's a rallying call, for a particular culture, whether it's religious or whether it's a government nationalism where they are saying you're defending your country, protecting it from something out there that's dangerous to it. And so this has been, if you like, an unconscious belief that's been agreed to for quite a long time. When organisations, armies, whomever, groupings, whenever they win, then they believe that they're on the side of right. Those who lose are the losers, and they feel, a failure. So it comes down to winning and losing, all of this. Whereas if I put my conflict resolution hat on, I can see that problem solving hasn't really been brought to the table, although I'm sure the various leaders of these groups sit down and map it out and work out the best way to win and the most efficient way of winning. I'm sure they're quite efficient in that regard. But has anyone actually sat down to avoid the war, to stop the war from even beginning by analysing it? And I guess there's analysts, certainly in governments, that are watching situations through surveillance and are trying to work out where the next threat is coming from. And I guess you'd have to be in that sort of mindset of preparing for war all the time in order for it to happen. Most of us have not been skilled in how to resolve conflict in the home. For example, if I disagree with you, rather than me trying to find the facts and say I'm right and you're wrong, and I feel really good when I'm right and you are defeated, which everybody knows that feeling. Just imagine if I came at that conversation in a different way and said, well, this is what I believe about war, for example. You may see it differently, but I'm very open to hearing what you have to say about war. I mean, I've not been in your shoes. Let's say I'm talking with a soldier, and I've certainly done that. I've talked to Vietnam vets. I've met some very beautiful men who were soldiers and who were suffering greatly, actually, as a result of some of the crimes that they'd committed. Even the word crime is, what is it? It's guilt. It's, under the legal system, yes, murder is a crime. And that's why we have it as a crime, because it actually gets rid of people. Has huge impacts on their family, and I'll come to that later. But I've met quite a lot of soldiers, and some of them are refuseniks too. Those are the ones that actually don't want to fight, who've been there and didn't like it, and they want it to stop. I've also met soldiers who very much are proud of their involvement in wars. You see that with the Anzacs. They march very proudly. They've experienced their friends being killed, whom they love very dearly, and so for them it's very personal. It was an intense experience for them, and they really, in their heart, believe that they were defending something very important. And again, if I'm coming at this discussion with this person from a perspective of respect, and it's both ways, not just me respecting them, but them respecting me, then we share perspectives. I mean, I remember in the United States, I actually met a soldier who was talking about a certain battle. And I asked him what he thought about peace. Now, he got defensive immediately. Oops, sorry, I thought that's what you were fighting for. And you could see he felt I was attacking him because I asked him what he thought peace really was and how to achieve it. And yet I was curious because, he's seen great violence, and my hope would be that through that contrast, through that conflict, one would start to think more deeply about creating a world of peace, because you can clearly see when you're in the midst of war the blood and carnage and limbs and bombs going off and the great despair and anguish and pain. I mean, I'm just imagining what it must be like. Hell on earth comes to mind, and yet people say they're doing it for heaven. I don't know about that. When you make someone suffer, they're not in heaven, they're actually experiencing hell in that moment. And being human, we'd have to have very strong justification that we're right in order to be able to live with that. So going back to conflict resolution and having a discussion with someone who's very different from you in their beliefs, you simply put your case to them, but you put it in a way that's not right or wrong, just amusings like what I'm trying to do right now. I'm just really illustrating from my perspective, but I'm open to other perspectives. I'm very open, actually, to someone, to tell me if they believe really that war is a good thing. And, I guess I can find within myself reasons where it is good. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out of the Second World War. I think the war itself produced a willingness to examine human rights. I think in probably battle, when you see great courage with someone saving someone, but see, that's coming from love. So that's where love sort of pokes up in a war zone, is when someone actually goes to save someone's life. And that's often what's touted as the heroism of war. It's actually coming from saving others. Isn't that interesting? It's not, you don't often get, I mean, maybe they've killed a lot of people and they get a medal for it, but you don't often see them out on the street bragging about it. I killed all these people, it's really good. Hey, great tally rate. If anything, through the communications, through those who want people to believe in their cause, they tend to talk about those they've saved and protected, which is the great justification as to why they do it. But I want to sort of move to another musing, in respect of actually killing people. My understanding, and I'm actually going to bring a spiritual dimension into this, because that is the reality in which I live. I did near-death research many, many years ago. I didn't do the 200 cases that I'd hoped to do, but I did interview 8 people for 2 hours each on their experience of dying and coming back. Now, this took me into some research on Raymond Moody, and you might want to check him out. He's done a lot of research on people who've died and come back. So what they say about the death experience is, now in the cases that, I might just start with the cases that I did personally, and then I'll talk about Raymond Moody's, work, which shows some patterns. In my cases that I did, one woman had been an academic and never considered anything mystical, anything about death or any sort of powers that she might possess or anyone else might. She was actually a philosophy academic. And in her situation, she said 2 weeks before the event happened, she was feeling this, she was starting to get psychic feelings, she said. She was knowing things before they happened. And she was uneasy. She said she woke up in the middle of the night, that's right. I'm remembering back, this is going back a fair while. She woke up in the middle of the night and she saw a level crossing. And she saw her husband slumped over the steering wheel of his car, dead. And then she's sitting there awake and he's next to her. And she's thinking it must be a dream. There's no, can't be real. But it felt real. She felt like she was actually there. She was quite haunted by this moment. And as I said, over the next few weeks, she started to have very strong psychic experiences. And what ended up happening was she had to drive to the coast. Her and her husband were driving to the coast with their 2 children. And at the last moment, she was very tired. She said she'd had a hard week. It was the end of the week. And at the last moment, she decided to drive. And they usually, it takes about 3 hours. I think it's 2 hours to get to the coast. And usually halfway they swap. So usually he would have driven first. So she ended up driving first. And she said they got to their usual place where they cross over. And he then started driving and they went down the mountain. And she said they were driving at about 120 k's and had a head-on collision. Just before the head-on collision, she said she remembers him putting his arm across her chest and going, accident. And then it was lights out for her then. She just remembers the lights of the car, and she was unconscious in a coma for about 3 months. And I always feel sad when I think of this lady. I always feel tears coming up within me because I felt her sorrow. So if I cry sometimes, I might, because I really do feel, I can feel her grief. Anyway, she woke up 3 months later and the police came and they showed her a photo of a level crossing. I'm going to cry. And her daughter had died. She had 2 kids. She didn't know that one of her children would die. Anyway, one of them did. Now, this lady was very heartbroken. She really was. And she had these extra powers as a result of the accident. She knew when things were happening, and she tried very hard to suppress the spiritual dimension in her life because she really didn't want to go there. It was very good that she came and talked to me because she'd never been able to talk to anyone. She said no one would believe her. And this had happened 20 years prior, so for her, she'd carried this burden a long time. Her and her living daughter didn't get on very well after the accident. Everything fell apart for her. And she really wasn't able to come to terms with the spiritual side of it. And she did say that she felt that her mother was around her just prior to the accident. She felt that, I think it was her mother, it might have even been her grandmother, I can't quite remember. But there was definitely a family member who was in spirit, who was around her at the time before, and she believes that that person was trying to warn her. So that was one case. Now the cases I had were really, really different. For me, that was the saddest case because she hadn't come to terms with it. The next cases are a bit more positive, so I won't cry this time. Now, I just have to remember back. One of the guys was very interesting. He said to me that he had a head-on collision and he came out of his body and he saw himself above the car looking down. And he saw the ambulance turn up. He said that he was heading towards the light, and he said that there was a voice that said, "You have to go back." He didn't want to go back. He was in actually a really beautiful, blissful state, and felt he didn't feel any connection to his body that was in the car. But he agreed to go back, and so he did. He went back. And he woke up in a coma too. Like he was in a coma, similarly to the last person, for quite a few months. In fact, he said that 3/4 of his brain had exploded on impact. 3/4 of his brain. And he couldn't speak. He said he thought he was saying hello to someone who was talking to him when he had some consciousness, obviously. He thought he was talking to them, but he was just not making any sense to whoever was talking to him. But in his mind, his perception, he thought he was talking like I'm talking right now to you. But in truth, he had a lot of work to do, and his body was, obviously very damaged from the accident. But he said he had additional powers. He told me that he had an affinity with animals, he said, after the accident. He could communicate telepathically. He said he could go out of his body at will, and did so. He said he actually embraced these new powers that he had, and he said that when we were sitting together in that room, he said that there were beings around us, and he said that he described what they looked like. I can't remember now because it's been quite a lot of years since I did this work. I actually recorded it on tape. But I do remember him saying there were beings around us. and for me at the time too, because I was sort of just awakening to all of this, and it's like, does that mean they can read my thoughts? Yes. So yes, you're a greenhouse. They can see straight in, and they know exactly. And for a while, I was a bit freaked out by that because I was thinking, don't think anything negative. They'll know. I have to laugh. But I've had insights into these things for many years now. So for me today, it's a lot easier. I have no issue with it at all. But back then, it was like an awakening. So it was like, whoa. So he was interesting. And another case I had was a woman who had been in an operation, and she actually had complications in the operation, and she said she went out of her body. And I distinctly remember her telling me that she looked down on the table and she felt absolutely no connection to that body lying on the table. It was like it wasn't even her own. She just looked at it and she had no feeling of attachment whatsoever. She said there were a lot of colours all around her, lots of colours. And similarly to the previous story, she also met with some being. I can't remember exactly if it was a being or whether it was a voice, but she certainly heard a voice, and the voice said, you have to go back. So she also had that experience of having a choice. Oh, actually, I'm saying she had to go back. They're given a choice, actually. It's not quite accurate. You can stay or you can go would be more accurate. In fact, that's true. But their feeling was to go back, so they chose to go back. So there is choice on the other side. It's definitely not forced. You don't have to come back if you don't want to. And I'm sure many don't. Although in that euphoric state, maybe they think, oh, well, I'll give it another go. So she said she came back. She had no fear of death. That's a common one with people who've had near death. And I had other cases. Oh, yeah, I'll tell you one more. This is out of body. This is an out of body experience, and it was actually someone that worked for me. I was working as a market analyst, and I had interviewers working for me. And I actually put an ad in the paper for people who'd had a near-death experience or out of body. And blow me down if this woman didn't contact me who I knew. And she told me she had been going out of her body since she was a child, thought it was normal. Then when she was a teenager, she realised actually it was very unusual and that most people don't have those experiences, and that she would be seen as quite weird. She said when she was really, really sick, she can remember going out of the body and sitting on the cupboard. Interesting, isn't it? I just can't imagine. I mean, how many times have you been in pain you wished you could? So I don't know how it's done, but she was able to do it very easily, and so she did. Now, this is a bit of a wild story, but anyway, it's a story. You can take it or leave it. She then told me that she met her husband, and they were 21, and it was one of those beautiful romantic stories of staring across a crowded room, and there he is, and they connect, meant to meet, probably. And they had 21 years of wonderful marriage, very happy, and then he died of cancer. Now, because she can go out of her body, this is where it gets interesting, he apparently came to visit her. Now, she wasn't out of her body at the time. He came to her, and he wore shorts that she really hated, she told me. Sense of humour on the other side. Note that. Now, obviously, I can't verify anything unless I go over the other side out of my body, and I haven't yet been able to manage that. So I can only tell you what I've been told. I have an open mind, so who am I to judge? Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is for the next bit. She then said that he used to come to her, and they would go together. She'd go out of her body and travel with him, and they'd go and see their son, who was in another country. Don't know if the son actually saw them, but they saw him. They were checking on him as parents. Isn't that amazing? Now, this is where the story gets really interesting. She said that she found in recent years, and this was quite a while ago now, that she was actually able to go into the future and into the past. And she's actually been to quite a few significant events. And you're going to ask me what they were. I sense one of them was Rome. There was some conflict, some battle to do with fire. There was lots of fire, and she was sort of over the scene, seeing people killing each other. So we're going back to the war theme. Interesting, eh? There's probably a lot of spiritual beings watching over those war zones. Who knows? They might be the ones that push you out of the way. It was some great fire. I'm just trying to remember what it was, but it was something at the time. I recognised what she'd told me, but I can't remember now. It's too long ago. Anyway, that was a real revelation for me. I was like, wow, can you imagine that? Can you imagine actually travelling into the future as well? And what is it like? You know, I've certainly heard stories about that. You know, different ways of living. And another thing that happened, and this is the final point with her, was her husband did come back to her and say, come with me. And she was very angry with him for saying that, because they had a son that was alive and she wasn't going to leave him, but he wanted her to come. And he said that there was a register on the other side that had names, and he warned her a few times of people who were going to die and when. How does that make you feel? Predestiny? I don't know. Interesting, isn't it? So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about that, because this is what I've heard. And the reason this all started for me was really because my husband at the time, his brother-in-law was an anaesthetic technician at Auckland Hospital, and he said they had a lot of people die on the table, but they came back. And he said that the doctors could be quite callous, and, you know, they'd say, you know, quite a few things, and it would come back via the nurses when this person actually awakened what they'd said. So they decided to remain silent during surgery. So it was because of this man that I investigated this subject area. And then I went and had a look at Raymond Moody. He's interesting. So it's Raymond Moody, Moody. I think, was it? Yeah, I think I was living in Mooney Street at the time, or Moody Street. I was living in a street with a similar name. I laughed. Coincidence? Who knows? Anyway, Raymond Moody's an expert, world expert on near-death experience. Well worth checking out. What I've actually written it into my book, and I'll put my draft manuscript on my website, www.worldpeacefull.com, because there's a section on Raymond Moody in there actually, and they do talk about the tunnel. And I've met a woman who said she went down the tunnel. I knew she'd had a near-death. She had an aura around her, and I'll just quickly tell you this one. She was Irish, and she had two twins. Oh, hang on, were they twins? Yeah, they were. They were twins. Down syndrome. They were Down syndrome. Now, she went to Lourdes in France to heal them. I don't know why. I'm pretty sure it was two sons. Anyway, whatever it was, she definitely went to Lourdes, and she was there for a miraculous healing, because there is a place there where they say that people can be healed. And she met this boy. They really connected. He was a young boy, and he gave her his grandfather's medals. They had a really special bond, her and this boy. Anyway, she went back to Ireland, and the boy, obviously her children were not healed. She was to live with it. And she went back to Ireland. He wrote to her a lot. He had a special feeling for her. It was really beautiful. Anyway, she said that she had a very weak heart, and her heart could stop. and had stopped at times and started again. Anyway, she had an experience where her heart stopped, and she actually went down what she called a barrel. She said it was a barrel, Susan. I don't know how to say it in Irish. It was a barrel, not a tunnel. It was more like a barrel. She said, I'm going to try and say it in her language. You can laugh at me then. I can be entertaining. I can't describe to you what the light was like, she said, but it was nothing I'd ever known in this life. The light was intense. I'm going to talk normally now because I actually want to go into the feeling of it. She saw a light being at the end of the tunnel, and she said that the love emanating from this light being was so overwhelming. She'd never ever experienced such an intense love. Never, and she'll never forget it. It changed her forever. But there was waves and waves and waves of this love and light emanating towards her. And she saw the face of this boy in the tunnel, or in the barrel, as she put it. It was a long barrel, so it wasn't like a tunnel. I see it as a barrel-like tunnel. That's the way I'd interpret what she was saying. Anyway, his face appeared to her. And he goes, hello, Margaret, And he goes, I love you, Margaret. And he was like her guide down that barrel. And she said when she felt the love and the light from this being at the end, it was very familiar to her. She said then she woke up and was never the same. And, when I met her, I knew she'd had something happen. She definitely had an aura around her. So the whole point of this discussion is really to show you that death is okay, and there's actually life after death in truth, so we don't actually die. That might give some relief to people who've lost people. They're actually happy on the other side, from what I understand, and they choose. It's a little bit like What Dreams May Come. Robin Williams played that. A little bit like that. They literally can create instantly on the other side what they want. I mean, as that woman pointed out, her husband was in those shorts she hated, and he said he went swimming. So he had a good time. So death in itself is not a bad thing. It's just that we've created a whole fear around it because we think that it's black after we die, it's all black. Therefore, we don't want to die. And so we're very frightened, and we're frightened of living as a result of being frightened of dying. And even the war situation, that creates even more fear of living because people get traumatized by war, in order to kill that enemy, and in reality there are differences that are not being resolved. There are beliefs driving these wars, that their security is at risk. Well, is that true? I mean, is that really true? I know through being a peaceful person that you can de-escalate conflict by being loving and understanding with people. And quite often people just need to be heard. We've lived in experiences where there's not a lot of love happening, even in the home. People have come from harsh environments. They've had very hard fathers. In many cases, that sort of stoic father image who doesn't show any emotion and conveys to his son that strength is containment, not crying. That's woman stuff. And maybe this is a way of differentiating the sexes, I don't know. I just know that love is very, very powerful. And when you truly are not in judgment of other people, which has to happen if you're going to fight them, you have to judge them as bad. You have to say they're the great evil or the great this or that. And that means you're in judgment. And I would imagine many of those texts that have been driving people's behaviour is all about non-judgment and love. Yeah, it's a great love that joins all of us. We're all family in actual fact. All of us. No exception. We've all come from the same source too, I might add. Because when you go to the other side, you'll notice they're not coloured. They're actually light beings. They don't... Well, they might turn up in a way that you're relating to, but in truth, they don't have bodies on the other side. So we're the ones that create the discriminations on this side of the veil. And then we decide that other is wrong, and then we decide they must be killed because they're a threat to us. But we don't question our thinking and go, well, is that true? Are they really a threat to us? Is it true that, we can't resolve this conflict? We can't sit down and really deeply listen? And I'm thinking of Israelis and Palestinians here. Cousins, no less. Can you build a wall and keep them out? Did it work? Does the threat of violence de-escalate, counter violence? Is it possible for people to actually meet up and talk? Is it possible to see yourself in the other as a cousin? Yes, you have different religions, but my understanding is that it's the one God. If it's the one God, wouldn't love be there for everyone? And whenever you feel love in your own heart for your own family, is that not the same energy of that very thing that you're worshipping, that loves you? If only people really deeply believed in that true love, you wouldn't be able to harm another. It wouldn't be possible. And I think what drives the violence is the pain, the great pain that people are feeling, the suffering. The suffering's not alleviated, so they seek revenge. And they feel if they can seek revenge and make them feel the pain they're feeling, then at least they're not the only one suffering. And that tends to be even how children behave. If they are fighting and they get hurt, they want to hit that other one. So it's a human instinct to hit back. But if we're going to evolve, we have to actually not hit back. Gandhi, of course, is a great teacher of non-violence, and that was practiced. I know in the first Intifada, non-violence was practiced. Martin Luther King practiced it as well. Various others have. So you don't hit back, basically. And what that gives to the other, and it is a gift to the other, is for them to see their own violence and anger. In order for them to own that they're hurting and upset, and most men won't do this, they will project out because they won't want to admit that they're actually suffering and in great pain. They might to their wives, but they're certainly not going to publicly display that they're really hurt, deeply hurt. And they want an apology. They want some sort of redress to acknowledge that they're feeling a loss of sorts. And that's how these things perpetuate, because there's never ever been any resolution. I mean, we can talk peace treaties till the cows come home, pardon my Australian vernacular. But you're not going to make peace by signing a piece of paper. It doesn't work. You actually have to really address the underlying issues that are the grievances and the pain that the people have gone through. You have to put yourself in their shoes. It's called empathy. How would I feel if I was Palestinian, living in great poverty, surrounded by anger and hurt, and great laughter too. I'm sure a lot of the families also keep their spirits up through song and dance, which has been their traditions. And over on the Israeli side, I've met a lot of Israelis too. They're wonderful. They have great music, great sense of friendship, and many of them get out there travelling. But they're also cut off from the truth on the other side by their government. So we've got misinformation both ways. You've got innocent people on both sides. You've got people suffering on both sides and feeling great fear. And fear, of course, doesn't lead to peace. It leads to more escalation of violence. So, again, thinking about the near-death stuff, those who do die, for those of you who lost someone, they do go on and they're okay. You are on a journey here, and you will, and what I was told certainly by people who have died and come back is that their life review happens. They get reviewed. So some being is standing next to them and they, believe it or not, see their life flash by their eyes. That's why I'm sure people have heard that before, that their life has literally flashed before their eyes. And that can happen actually if you're facing death. That's quite common, that comment. So when they pass over, it does too. They go through it scene by scene, but not only from their own perspective, they can actually see through the eyes of the other that they've had the conflict with. They become the other. Isn't that interesting? So it's like your whole life is being recorded, spiritually speaking, and you do get the opportunity to review it at the end, and then you can see where you've made mistakes. And certainly that review is not a judgment day, like some people believe. It's actually a means of you learning from the experience that you've had, because you've lived in a situation where you didn't, you were following others who were believing similar things. You were educated in a certain way, and you did what you did out of believing that you were right. Why else would you do it? So this reflection has been an interesting digression. I actually have digressed off what I thought I would be talking about, but I didn't actually know. I usually let myself flow because all these things link in together. So I guess I want to pull it full circle to whenever you do kill another person, they're actually okay. They're like a butterfly being released. They'll go. But the people that you're really hurting are actually the family and the friends. And that can be 30, 40, 50 people who suffer for the rest of their life because they're believing they've lost something. So the very target that you think you're targeting is not targeted at all. It's the people that are left behind that their whole life has changed. Mothers in particular are the ones that really suffer the deepest because their baby is part of them. As my dear friend said when she had her child, she said, he's like part of my body. So I feel deeply for the anguish of the mothers and the fathers, of course. The bonds that they share with their children, and they've watched them growing up, and then they find out they've been taken out, shot, or hurt in some way, and they feel the pain themselves. So this, of course, doesn't usher in peace in our world. It is a fact of our world at this time that these things are happening right across the globe. And people are going through the misery of it. My hope would be that through this suffering, they find some form of peace. Many people, when they've suffered deeply, often go to spiritual life anyway. They might go to a religion, or they look for something to say that there is a reason or a meaning behind this life so that they can cope and survive. And some really do live very deeply spiritual lives as a result of great trauma that's occurred in their life. And that then brings them a sense of, maybe some would call it divine justice in some way, that, that this other that has died is still alive. So I think I will finish this conversation there and just perhaps, finalise it by saying that I send love to everyone, governments, those engaged in using violence, and I'm not going to use labels because killing is killing. Doesn't matter what you're wearing or who you say you're fighting for or what your reasons are. I'm sending you love and understanding. You can turn it all around through learning to love the other. The enemy is the teacher. They're teaching you about yourself. There is, in truth, no right and wrong. There is only what serves you and what does not. If you feel joy in your life, well, and it's a deep joy. I'm not talking about pleasure from cruelty. I'm talking about a really deep joy which unifies you with others. So when you look into the eyes of others, you feel joy. When you feel that, you're in alignment with that higher source, whatever that is, that higher intelligence. When you're angry, feeling empty, when you're suffering, you've kind of disconnected from the well-being of this world. And that means you're not in alignment. Your thoughts are not in alignment with the deepest truth. Truth is always a joyful experience. It's nothing to fight for because it's eternal. Truth cannot be destroyed, so you don't have to fight for it. Everybody realises their own truth when they're ready. No one can force a realisation on them or make them believe what they believe. They can condition them into it from childhood, but ultimately we believe what we believe, and every human being on the planet has a right to believe what they want to believe. It's their life and they're sovereign. So I respect all people, no matter who they are, and wish you happiness and peace and great love. So I'll sign off and wish you a wonderful life. Be peace.